at this. We have a lot of guys here. Yeah. Good job, guys. Finally. Showed up. That's right. Ah, is that going on? No, that's over by now, isn't it? Oh, it's going today, but
Maybe it is over by now.
yeah.
None of us are too committed.
No. Well, any thought-provoking questions? Yeah, well. Oh, there's a.
So we had that shared experience of attending this morning, you and I. And I'm glad because I'd like to hear what you remember, what you were thinking about when Lama Michael was talking about awareness of awareness.
Good, I'm glad you, at first I was afraid you were going to stop it. I wanted to know what you remembered. I was going to say, wow, that's really mean. No. But I do remember that part. It was interesting to me because, yeah, he was teaching again the method of placing attention on your experience, and particularly using a bad experience being that's something that you can easily keep your attention on, maybe more easily. And then he said that's kind of a high kind of practice, but then higher than that, or maybe the highest kind, or, I don't know, did you say high? Anyway, most difficult or higher, is awareness of awareness, and being aware of awareness. And that he said that's really difficult to do. So, so what about it?
Just as a practitioner whom I respect, just wondered what else you thought about that.
Well, it's interesting for me because so who knows, maybe I don't really do it, but because I did have training from Alan Wallace on these 3 types of shamatha that he used to teach all the time. One of them was awareness of awareness, and for a long time I couldn't get a connection, didn't seem quite possible or something, and then I did some retreat with it, and I really clicked with it, I felt. So who knows? And so I actually feel like for me, it's almost easier than, I was kind of thinking when he said that, I was thinking, wow, it's almost easier for me to do that than to stay with especially with the changing of, just experiences arising. Because for me, the awareness, because it is more unchanging, that if I can be in that, it seems easier to me than the other, but it's just, so that's, I didn't, but I think it's interesting because we're really, in a way, you're just looking at they say we say the mind has the 3 aspects, or it's 3 characteristics, or 3 qualities of emptiness and what they call either clarity or sometimes luminosity, and then unimpededness. So, but the first 2 are especially talked about. So the empty nature of the mind, and so you look for your mind and look for yourself, look for anything, and you cannot place it, you can't see it, it has no characteristics, it's changeable, there's just not, it just isn't something there, and that's, the emptiness aspect. But on the other hand, when we're here, sitting here, we're having experience, right? We're having experience. And so that is the demonstration of the clarity of the mind, is that we experience. So it's not just emptiness, there's just nothing. There is experience. So, and then the unimpeded is more about that. I guess I just read recently, Ringu Tulku calls that continual flow. And so but Kala Rinpoche used to always use, or the translators for Kala Rinpoche would use unimpeded. And so that's that, it just never stops, right? The mind is just continual flow. You can't, sometimes I say, like, can you just wait a minute so I can catch up? But, no, it won't, it can't. It's everything all around us, and our set of experience, whether we think it's internal or external, that's all our mind nature manifesting in this unimpeded characteristic. And Trungpa Rinpoche, I remember one place or another in his books, he mentions that we tend to get very wrapped up in the clarity aspect. So, meaning, I think just all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the stuff we see, all the, sensual perceptions, and that we see that, or we experience that, we notice those things more than we notice the empty nature of all those. So in our meditation, we're often looking more for that empty quality. The word training in that. And so in a way, it's just getting more of a balance by doing that. So I just think of, these different meditation methods that it's sort of like figure ground, they're together, you can look at one or the other, and in a way you're looking at the same thing. But I think that's kind of interesting. Yeah.
I think in a beginner's mind, describes the practice of water as waves, meaning that waves are always, like, as calm as water can be, possibly, there still are waves. Meaning, as calm as mind can be, there still are waves. And then I think Ringu Tulku also says that the radiance of mind is like thought. That thoughts are the practice, like thoughts are like waves in the practice of mind. The mind, it just kind of churns them out naturally. But we kind of project meaning or solidity onto those things. And that instead of letting them just be waves or thoughts. So I don't know if that has any connection, but that quote from Beginner's Mind just came to me about the practice of water is waves. So like the practice of minds is like thoughts. They just come without us asking them to.
Yeah. Yeah, and the natural radiance of the mind, thoughts including concepts, including emotions, but also it's really just any experience is just continually coming, and it's said the source is the mind, and that's gets, I mean, the wave analogy is nice because it gets to the fact that the two are not separate. You know, you can't really separate a wave from an ocean, and yet you can understand that that's kind of two different things to pay attention to, or two different perspectives in considering a wave versus the bulk of the ocean. And I think that seems to be, so that kind of makes sense, because we of course say that the empty and clear and unimpeded, that all those are not, they're not separate things, or yeah, I mean, Kala Rinpoche used to, it's one of the things that really attracted me to his teaching, was that he would often start with talking about or somewhere in his talks, he would talk about the nature of the mind and tell those three things. And I just, yeah, wow. It was just so interesting, and so I don't know, it just attracted me, just hearing that. It still does. I don't, it's still a puzzle. It's still, but it's I think it's inspiring somehow. Jeff.
So returning to William's question about the practice of being aware, does that apply to any particular part of that triple aspect of mind, or does it apply to all of those things, or as an actual applied practice? Where does it fit?
Well, now that seems like two different questions, maybe. Because the different, how it matches up with the different aspects of mind. I think doing that practice is a bit, it emphasizes the empty nature, because it's partly, as Lama Michael said this morning, your awareness doesn't really change. It's sort of an underlying, permeating thing. And whereas the, focusing on experience and that kind of practice is the very changeable stuff going on. So I would associate that with the clarity aspect. But where that practice fits in, I mean, I think this gets talked about in different ways. Like Alan Wallace taught awareness of awareness as being a shamatha method. So it was shine without an object, basically. And yet, it seems like in the Dzogchen tradition, they have you, and I'm not trained in Dzogchen much at all, but they have you attend to awareness, and then they call it Rigpa. But so it feels more like a precursor to Dzogchen, which is maybe, I don't know, so maybe it's a little different or a little more than shamatha. I don't know. What would they, or would they just call it shamatha? I don't know. Yeah, when they talk about just, so we don't know. Yeah. So I think they would.
It's not that it's complicated, it's just that the
Yeah, well, I mean, it's sometimes it looks like it's being taught to where you're just meant to directly rest in the nature of mind. And the instructions, though, are kind of like awareness of awareness. So.
So what do you remember of the actual instructions for the awareness from this morning?
He didn't give any, did he? Somebody was asking a
Really? No, I mean,
question.
I think you say everything I remember.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add.
I think because, let's see, did somebody ask? They asked about it. Or did he? How'd that go? Can't remember. Anyway, yeah, he didn't really give instructions for it. He was just referring to it.
Just hold it for a second.
Is this on now?
You got to push the thing for a little bit. There.
Go. So yeah, I mean, as far as the instruction part, he was just including that as a potential object in shamatha or in calm abiding, and he was emphasizing it in a way, as you described.
One way that I've heard awareness of
Microphone.
I went to a different center one time. It was more Dzogchen. I don't know how you pronounce it, but Dzogchen. That was their tradition, and they did calm abiding in that fashion. And what they would do would to be okay. So put your attention on your breath. Okay, so your awareness is on your breath. And then say, okay, now let your awareness go from your breath to something larger and expand from there and expand from there and expand from there. And to awareness of awareness kind of expanding from an object out to many objects, out to now your mind is aware of the room, it's aware of your body, it's kind of like they expanded on several objects at a time. To where you just start with, like we do, seemingly you choose an anchor. And then they would say, well, okay, now start with that anchor and then expand your awareness from that anchor to other things and notice the diversity of anchors that you could have in a sitting session. And they would call that kind of like expansion of your awareness. But I've only went a couple times, so it's only speaking from that experience.
Yeah, I guess I did have a little. Ken McLeod once taught a retreat that I was on where he used methods from that tradition, and that was nice. He would have us do start with attention on the breath, and then similar to what you're saying, gradually let go of that. And that seems like it is kind of a good approach to do something a little easier to start with, and then
Seems
kind of
like
release.
Seems like by almost by expanding your awareness into more objects, your awareness of awareness is implied by the way in which your focus from one object to the next changes.
I don't know.
I don't know either.
I mean, I think that to me, the awareness, the objects are, you can place your mind on one object and then another and another. So I call that using if you're changing objects, you're either choosing to have one and then choosing to have another, or in some ways, meditating on your unfolding experience in a way is just kind of like a series of objects. But then I don't call that awareness of awareness, because you're not looking at that underlying continuity that is not changing, that is not manifesting as a thing.
How is it not awareness of an object and awareness of awareness with that practice, I guess is my question. And it's kind of a big semantic kind of headache. And
wait, you're saying, because you're saying awareness of an object and you're saying awareness of awareness, so I'm not sure.
It's like, how do you differentiate between the two? If you're using an object, then how is it not just awareness of the object?
Then is awareness of an object.
Right.
That's just, you're using an object.
Yeah.
I think the problem here lies in the use of the word awareness, because it's sort of mindfulness of awareness or mindfulness of an object. The mindfulness, Drumpai has the quality of recollecting or knowing that you're paying attention. The terms for actual awareness are different than the terms for paying attention. So there's a distinction there. But I would have to stop and start everything all over again in order to kind of figure out the pieces of it.
I was thinking back since this morning, which I listened to the session, the Q&A session on streaming, and Lama Michael at one point was refining the definition of the suffering that is relieved by someone pursuing the Bodhisattva path by saying it isn't just the suffering that we all could identify, well, somebody's hurt themselves, but that alleviating the confusion that one has, presumably by awakening them to the existence of the Dharma as a teaching, which really narrows down the myriad of beings that you could actually help alleviate their suffering. I mean, it would restrict it to human beings, and it would restrict it to those human beings who are ripe, I would guess, to receive the Dharma. And then so I was thinking that if we're just relieving garden variety suffering, I'm going to say acts of kindness, we're really just helping someone accommodate to the relative world. Or I mean, in a way we are. The only way to alleviate suffering would be if the desire realm is suffering just intrinsically, it would be to maybe let them stew in their suffering. I mean, suffering could, some forms of suffering, I mean, more psychological suffering, I suppose, could actually be something we shouldn't be in such a hurry to palliate. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, thoughts on that. I mean, don't try it on me. Yeah, right. Somehow I have the sense that everybody has enough suffering. I don't know if there, we may not think so, but it really seems, at least it certainly seems to be characteristic of the human realm that there's plenty of suffering of all types. And, we talk about the 3 types of suffering, the kind of the gross suffering, the broken arm, the whatever, the pain of a mental anguish or something, but also the suffering of change. And we all have the suffering of change, even if it looks like we don't have too many gross level things, which after a while, pretty much everybody has that too. But, change is happening all the time, and we have a hard time being comfortable about that or being relaxed about that. And then it said there's just the ongoing underlying suffering that if we look closely enough, we notice that any given moment we're kind of itching for the next, like we don't feel like we're quite there yet, right? There's like, I don't know, maybe other people feel, but the feeling of just like this right now, right here, perfect. Nothing, I don't need anything ever again. Do you have that all the time? I don't have that. So the thing of that we're always kind of, even in a very subtle way, wanting something. Even sometimes we don't know what we want. Something different, something not this, whatever. So this lack of actual full, peaceful, complete contentment is everybody has all the time, I think, pretty much. So, but if you're making a point, it is an interesting point. We can think, well, even just looking at our own lives, much less helping anyone else, we could say, well, what we need is to cut the root of all this. And so you can look at, and if you consider, I would assume that Lama Michael, when you use the word confusion, sometimes that's another word that we use, we commonly would talk about ignorance or fundamental ignorance, and which is the root, we talk about as being the root of everything, and not like ignorance, like I don't know what the state capital is of all the 50 states, but ignorance like I don't know the nature of reality. I don't know my own, I am confused into thinking that I am a independent, solid, permanent, some little speck in there somehow, even though everything's constantly changing. I don't really believe it, and you're out there, and all that whole stuff that comes from that fundamental ignorance. That's the root. So if we could just get right at that, we would solve theoretically, we'd solve our problems. We'd attain Buddhahood if we could just really get that and be there all the time. But meanwhile, because of that ignorance, we've sprouted all this afflictive emotions, which are compelling us to do things, and by doing things, we're having habitual patterns formed that aren't leading to our happiness, and so we have all this mess. But if somebody wants to, what does it take to be able to practice? You do need to have food. You do need to have a life that's calm enough. You need to be warm enough, or you need practical things in order to have a life where you can practice. And so, it's said like, whatever, war-torn countries or whatever, you can't even hope to practice maybe, and maybe that's not 100% true, but it certainly makes it more challenging. And so if we could solve the war, that would be good for, that would help. So it's not, I think that, the teachers always say, like, yeah, giving the Dharma if you can and have something to offer in that way, giving, as teachers give teachings, but also give in any other way that you can give. So it's not only the Dharma that is valuable. It all contributes. And then there's the other side of it, is that giving, that generosity is not just impacting, it's not just a question of what the other person would benefit from. It's also what changes in our minds when we make gifts, when we are generous. And that's transformative in a positive way and can come from very mundane gifts as well as other more seemingly profound gifts. So there's a lot there. But if you know how to cut my confusion, welcome to it. Start there. But otherwise, it's okay to, give me a ride home or whatever. So, yeah.
Along these lines, I feel like I've been working on this a lot and maybe turning this around just a little bit, rather than the approach that maybe it would be good, to maybe let some folks suffer a bit in order to learn. I feel like I sometimes am grappling with the notion that perhaps it is good for me to get challenged with that possibility of suffering. So in other words, something will seem to cause me pain, and then, it's said often, pain is inevitable, but suffering is the choice. And you experience the pain, and then you can either grasp more tightly onto the source of the pain, or you can try to let loose of the grasping onto that and not suffer, if I'm understanding this correctly. And so then it seems that it is an opportunity then to decide, I'm experiencing pain. It's like if someone strikes me, I am going to feel pain. It's going to hurt physically, right? Now I have a whole bunch of options. I can resent that guy that struck me, and I can, be really angry, and man, that's going to hurt for a couple days, grasping a hold, focusing, I guess, on that. Or the opposite, which is to say, obviously he's striking me because he's confused and ignorant and, not very enlightened, and he's thinking he needs to strike people, and I should have compassion for that, and a completely different direction, rather than grabbing a hold of the things that might cause me more suffering. And so then, it seems to kind of get turned into that notion like, okay, well, this is an opportunity, the Buddha just took the form of Trump and just said something that drove me nuts. So can I be grateful for this? Should I be grateful for this? Is this pain I'm feeling actually, an opportunity and therefore a beneficial thing? Should I, perhaps even be grateful for this? And as opposed to, the other way of looking at it, which is to, really, as I say, grasp a hold of that painful experience and then suffer and suffer and suffer. And so I just want to ask, like, I've been trying to sort this out a lot, and a lot of stuff is seeming to cause a lot of pain lately. And so I am contemplating that notion that, okay, this is actually an opportunity. Yes, indeed, the Buddha is taking the form of this teaching or this challenge, and I can decide what am I going to do? Am I going to suffer or not, or I'm going to endeavor to not suffer, by not grasping onto that. Am I misunderstanding something, or is that actually sort of the difference there between pain and suffering? And is in that respect, since pain does seem to be inevitable. We will step on sharp things, and stuff will happen. Where we will. Is it in that sense? Is it true that pain is actually sort of an opportunity for us to benefit from? I guess.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with the things you're saying. The kind of the pain versus suffering thing kind of reminds me of Ryan talking about the experience that can just come and go, and so depending on the pain that it certainly can have. Pain or whatever it is that you have the experience, and if you just have it perceptually, and it's gone the next minute, and you really don't have to think about it, you don't have to resist it, you don't have to, as you say, cause suffering in the many ways that we do, like the whatever, I shouldn't have done that, the regret or the recriminations or the whatever that we, and then we also, is this tendency apparently that we just really, we tend to exaggerate bad and we tend to exaggerate good, and to make everything, I guess, more clear for ourselves. I'm not sure what the point is, but I think we can really notice that anyway, so you can really just pile on in the mind, and you could suffer from some incident for the rest of your life, quite possibly. So there is that piece. And that is the way I use the words, pain and suffering, and kind of distinguishing that pain is more of a sensation and suffering is all kinds of stuff that goes with it. And definitely the things that you mentioned, we have all kinds of opportunities with anything like this. And the responses that you mentioned are good, and there's so many ways to use a painful experience in the Dharma, and we should using any of them is good. Being grateful for it, as far as being an opportunity, and taking advantage of the opportunity, and just either understanding having more compassion for the perpetrator, or having more compassion for anybody else who might be experiencing the same kind of pain, and bringing that all to mind, and recognizing how your own experience is universal with others, and so many ways that we can use it.
So I was just going to say earlier, when you were talking about the kind of the basic level of compassion before before imparting the teachings, like that. I remember one of the first things I heard here from Julia was how just establishing a basic level of friendship is really the first step in imparting teachings. And I think that's what I've always experienced here. So I was thinking about last week. Sopa was talking about something. What you just said a minute ago reminded me of it. How when you examine closely, you realize, like, every moment there are these little imperfections, and it's, you know, sort of the closer you look, the worse it gets, you know. And yet I think there's also a basic goal to cultivate contentment, and those sort of seem like two forces maybe pulling in the opposite directions. Or I don't know if maybe it's just an apparent contradiction in there.
Yeah, so you're kind of contrasting the well, I'd call them, you know, practices. So one being to look, and now I'm remembering that was in response to your question, wasn't it, last week, about that life was pretty good. So yeah, and so Zopa was encouraging you to look and see how much you really do suffer. So, which is, you know, that is a good practice and something to do. But and let's see, and then but you're comparing that with the contentment. So in contentment, a contentment practice. I mean, there's probably a lot of ways to cultivate contentment, but part of it is definitely, and maybe a big part of it is, it's more of a letting go practice, right? It's like, instead of like, oh, potato chips, you know, don't have one, want one, you know, then that's, so if I could just let that thought go, I'm okay, don't need it, you know, don't need that potato chip. So I feel like that's, you know, the but, you know, contentment is also finding,
Another thought
ways to do it.
or thought that occurred to me was cultivating contentment, but avoiding complacency.
So kind
right?
of,
That good idea, right?
yeah, yeah, you can do that. Well, of course, well, so depending what complacency about what are you meaning?
Let's see. Oh, I don't know. That's a good question. I feel like there's always this nagging doubt about, you know, I'm sure there's something else somewhere that I should be doing. Am I doing the right thing right now? You know, I'm sure there's some other way I should be being more effective than what I'm doing right now. You know,
yeah, that's it. I love those contradictions. I mean, that's a nice, or I don't know, I don't want to say contradictions, but opposing things where you can say, so if I were so complacent, like if I took contentment to a complacency place, then would that mean
I guess
I don't have to meditate?
Exactly. If I get complacent, cool. I mean, I often do in this regard get complacent and don't practice, because I feel like I don't feel the urgency to
yeah, and at least and it's also just a loss of opportunity.
Right.
So even if it's, I mean, like one thing I always was somewhat comforted by hearing that, you know, sleep is karmically neutral, considered generally. So at least, when you're sleeping, you're not generating a bunch of
Not doing any
bad
harm.
habits or anything. So, and I think, some of what we do, maybe when we're complacent, might not be generating a bunch of bad, a bunch of negative, but it's definitely a loss of opportunity. So we have all
Right.
this together. We got all the conditions. We got all the teachings. We got the body. We got the time. We got, and the time is tick, 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 And yeah.
The practice of contentment and the practice of noticing all the little irritating things moment by moment are exactly the same. The
I don't know
practice
if I
of
agree.
contentment and that practice of noticing all the continual flow of dissatisfaction, they're exactly the same practice.
So I was contemplating what Zopa was saying this week about suffering, and I was like, oh, I'm not suffering. My body feels good, all this stuff. And then I was like, well, wait, how am I creating suffering? And then I saw the toothpaste in the sink again. and I was just like, okay, I'm irritated by the toothpaste in the sink again. Those are like, how am I creating this like moment? Or like when I stepped into a drop of water on the kitchen floor with my sock, and then all of a sudden I like, revulsion, and I'm like, why didn't a certain someone who I love very dearly wipe this up? And I was just like, oh, okay, I'm kind of creating these tiny little moments all the time, and I can either say something to the dearly beloved someone, or I can just accept the wet sock, and maybe in 2 lifetimes the wet sock won't bother me when I step into this puddle on it was a very small drop. It wasn't a puddle. I'm overstating it, but I was kind of examining those little bits all week, and I was just like, oh, okay, those are like the small bits of suffering. And then, then there's the driving suffering when somebody cuts you off, or when somebody crosses the, crosswalk very slowly, and
Right.
you can see it's going to turn red soon, and like, I got to
Yep.
make my turn.
Yep.
And so I was kind of noticing those things all week, and then I was sort of like, I'm hoping that noticing those things will have benefit in maybe bigger, maybe more impactful run-ins with people, that I can not complain about the toothpaste and perhaps step back a little bit in some bigger confrontation a little bit, so that I can be more skillful in engaging it. But those were the little bits of suffering I noticed this week, so I thought I'd share.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, and I think that it's contentment to me feels like like a relaxation of the mind, or it's a relaxation of that impulse to correct or to change or to grasp or repel at a very micro, and it's good to look at a very micro level on that, because I think that is very impactful.
One of the words for contentment in Tibetan is actually means sort of being free of kind of wanty needy. So wanty needy, these kind of yes, so it's whether it's at kind of the course level, the kind of the big, I'll be happy when. And it's really clearly, you're never going to be happy. You're going to always be, I'll be happy when. And that's permanent condition. Down to, actually, my sock is wet. It's a wet sock. And my life does not actually depend upon having a dry sock. So there is that kind of a profound relaxation in that, being with exactly what arises.
Absence of hope and fear.
Yeah, absence of hope and fear. And this is a point where the suffering of change, when we're talking about the three sufferings, then being able to relax with the flow of what arises in the mind, you have to actually relax on the idea that one kind of experience is going to be stable, or that you're even going to be able to make any kind of experience stable. Part of the suffering of change is that desire to have something stable, to fixate on. It's kind of like, I need the handrail in my life. I need a permanent thing to grasp onto. So being able to be with the flow of things, with whatever they are, and at first, when you start to look closely, it will be a whole bunch of little things, whatever it is, a sense of discomfort, dis-ease, and the deeper it goes. So that suffering of change is about that grasping after stability. It's kind of grasping to make something out of anything, and relaxing with that. And the deeper that we go looking into the kind of confusion and suffering, the more there's a mirror between getting down to more the sense of just a sense of distortion, which comes along with not recognizing the nature of mind and nature of experience. There's just a distortion in that comes. It's kind of like grasping after something, but there's nothing to hold on to, so it just kind of hurts to try to hold on to this distorted view of reality. So then, and going back to your question about the Dharma being the thing that undoes this, it's not so much the Dharma in a formal sense of the word, like being able to teach people about such and such, in which case you have to find people who want to sit down and listen to you, and they won't run away and be bored. But it's more a matter of just that. You could say, if you found something, whatever it was, that helped somebody undo any level of that, that is the Dharma, or any being. Or if you could be just a way of being with others that helped ease any level of that, that's the Dharma. So it's less of a formal thing than it's more of a functional way to define Dharma, as opposed to a category of things to think about.
The friendliness that was mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, you wouldn't wish poor conditions on somebody just so they can use it as an opportunity to practice.
You have to have great ambitions. Otherwise, you should really
Well, it's already 8:30.
They could use it.
Okay, I wanted to say one more thing, because I also thought, we get accused of looking so much at suffering, so I also thought when your life is pretty good, another thing you can do is Tonglen, where you really give away, just give it away. Now you have, while you have a good life and happiness or good feelings, expand that and offer that, and imagine everybody having that as well. And it's also good to increase joy and happiness, as well as look harder at our suffering. So, yeah.
throw a bliss party for the universe.
Yeah, that's a good thing to do. So, anyway.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Well, we usually use that as it's rejoicing usually refers to rejoice in others, either in their happiness or in their good works. And so the idea that if you can be happy for, like whatever, the little girl over there who's just learned to ride a bike, if you can enjoy, if you can have just as much enjoyment as she has if you are rejoicing in that. And they say you get, by rejoicing in the merit of, say, a great teacher or something, that you get the equal merit. So I never quite go literal with those, but they say that. So that's really valuable practice. Yeah. And then, of course, rejoicing in somebody having something you want or are envious of. That's another rejoicing practice that's maybe harder, but good. All right. Well, pretty soon we'll be on the winter retreat. You going out for any of it? Are you going out for any of the retreat?
I don't know yet.
I'll better think about it.
Probably not. But,